I think we are, that this economic reform effort sits near the center of a very extraordinary power shift that's going on in a larger sense that I think the United States has not yet fully digested. If this economic reform program that Xi Jinping has launched is successful, it is going to, I think, make the shift even more exaggerated. And it's going to mean that the old ways in which we have dealt with China, which have been pretty much of a, of a stronger power to a weaker power, also I think with a presumption that their system of governance is not as good as a democratic system of governance. There's a lot of judgment there, whatever you may think about that. But that, of course, hasn't gone down very well in China. So I think we're going to have to kind of readjust if we expect to get to any of the really critical problems which sort of confront the world as sort of common interest, whether it's Ebola or terrorism or climate change or even world trade. And I think we're just not even we have a president going over there in 2 weeks. I don't know what's on the agenda. I think they're trying to figure it out at high speed. But there is something shifting underneath our feet, and this economic reform could be another huge piece of that shift, which could require us to almost completely format how we deal with China.
Jack, is American business prepared to compete with a China that succeeds in this reform effort?
Well, it's a complicated question. I think we've seen American companies, global companies, invest in China in the consumer sector, and some successes, some not. I find it very interesting that Jerry Yang's picture is on the cover of Forbes magazine, not for what he's done in Menlo Park or at Yahoo, but for his relationship with Jack Ma. And I think that leads me into a comment about what I see as the future for American business in China is going to be more about investing in businesses in China that are run locally than it is going to be about trying to, be a Google or a General Motors investing in plants that are designed to compete and distribute against the Chinese competitors. I am very put off by the notion that so many journalists and scholars say that it's a zero-sum game. If it is a zero-sum game, America loses. And to me, the challenge is to figure out ways to invest in the China growth story while being very careful about competing domestically with consumer-related products. One of the things that we've started in a venture business that my son and I started in Beijing 8 years ago. We've started 40 companies from scratch. The ones that have been the most successful have been those that are founded and run by local Chinese entrepreneurs. And I say local to distinguish between one who's been to the Stanford Business School or the Harvard Business School or worked for Microsoft. The most successful businesses in China, I think, going forward are going to be those that are run by people who really know the local territory. So the way American business is going to compete, with China, in my view, is on a global scale, and by being very thoughtful about how they invest in China, and being very careful about trying to compete on the ground with Chinese companies for consumer products.
The regulatory change we're talking about taking place in China, enforcement of environmental compliance costs on firms all over the country, enforcement of labor protection terms, allowing class action lawsuits by consumer groups for product safety issues, radical change to the way that land is accessible to companies for building new facilities, radical change in the access to banks and lending, the availability of debt markets, removal of barriers to entry to market that lets new competitors come in and disrupt the way things are happening, letting companies go bankrupt and creating a consequence for not using shareholders' money well. These and many, many other changes that are happening today that are not maybe going to happen in 5 years, but are starting to happen today in an urgent manner, this radically changes the cost of goods and cost of production in China. Much of what we think of as China's sweet spot as a producer, as a manufacturer, as a competitor, changes as a result of what we are talking about happening here. China's appetite for goods from around the world and services around the world change radically once consumers are allowed to more directly express their appetite for what they need to consume and have greater ability to consume as well. I mean, just think about the Chinese appetite for American wine. What does, say, 20, 30, or $40 billion a year of more U.S. wine going to China as an export look like? I don't know. I mean, what does the average American bottle of wine cost of, shipment? $10, $12, $15? What does $40 billion worth of wine look like? And what does it mean in California, Washington, Oregon, to come up with another 40 billion bottles, or what have you, $40 billion worth of juice to put on that boat? Take that and multiply that times 15,000 products and think about whether business is responding to the opportunities. That's just on the export side. There's lots of different ways, other ways we can think about it too, both as a demand phenomenon and where China's costs are relative to our costs in serving the world demand, serving our own demand, serving their demand. This is big stuff.